Hey, good morning, everyone. So I'm starting with my daily cyber governance webinar. Why I'm starting this webinar is basically because the cybersecurity governance is a growing space. All organizations today are facing attacks, and they need senior leadership to manage this particular aspect. Whether it's a mid-sized company or even a small company today, faces a major chances of a cyber attack, which can actually bring your businesses down. Now, this has been ongoing for quite some time. I've been observing this space for almost 20 years now, and I've worked with the Indian Army. And today, the space has become a global risk. So far, so much that today we're talking about cybersecurity being the second largest GDP of the world, right? So that's where we come from. And with digitization and proliferation of internet into our daily lives, cybersecurity has become a major requirement. But cybersecurity is a problem statement which has to be driven from the top. It cannot be managed bottoms up. You cannot apply controls and then say that we are secure. There's a process behind it. It has to be a policy and risk driven process. So therefore, cybersecurity governance is something which needs to be understood uh, in a great manner with growing economy of India, the APAC region, and overall across the world. Now, why governance is the backbone of resilient global organization. If you see any organization which has been consistently doing well, has a great governance architecture, whether it is financial governance, whether it is operational governance, whether it is governance of the risk, you will see that all resilient organizations have great governance to back it up. Now, what is governance? Governance is something which is driven from the top. That is top management's involvement in the business objectives of the organization. And today, cybersecurity is a governance aspect. It becomes part of the due diligence for any given organization, right? So we see organizations deploying and spending a lot of money, right? There are budgets which are allocated. We have a great amount of tools. Uh, they are disparate in nature. You have a great security uh, information and event management system. You have a great EDR. You have firewalls. You have a SOC which is continuously monitoring. You have security in place for your cloud, uh, infrastructure. But yet you are facing breaches, and it's bringing you downtime. It's causing loss of revenue. Now, it is not because of technology. It is somewhere the missing link. You are missing your security priorities, and those priorities is what has to be driven from the top, and that's what governance is all about. So what is that I'm going to cover in today's short webinar, around 15 to 20 odd minutes. So what cyber governance means? Okay, that's something which I'm going to talk about. Why is it a business advantage today? It brings a lot of trust. It brings assurance. uh, your business actually becomes a resilient business, and therefore governance is a business advantage today. I'm going to give a wide framework which is based on 5 pillars and a simple 3-step model, and how organizations can start today governing cybersecurity in their organizations, right? So that's the aim, to make you understand how you can drive security in your organizations if your organizations does not have a top down approach and has a bottoms up approach. Now, as we've seen, right, we have seen that most of the organizations which have got breached and has faced major outages, ransomware attacks, data loss, downtime, it is not due to unavailability of tools. It has been majorly due to lack of governance. The governance aspects was missing. That means of ownership required to look into security aspect was missing. So ownership is a major factor when you're driving governance, right? Your risks are not understood completely. Therefore, you do not know what is your appetite for risk. You might keep spending money where it's not required. You do not have an overall view of your risk. Cybersecurity is a techno management space. Your leadership has to understand technology and has to understand business priorities, right? Lack of reviews. Top management does not take it as a priority unless something happens. Don't wait for something to happen. You need to have constant reviews. And we and I've seen in organizations they buy tools which are not aligned to their risks. So you need to align what kind of tools you require based on risk. Now, I've seen in major organizations where two types of EDRs were deployed on the same machine. Now, what was the need? Not understood, and the company was paying for it. That ultimately reduces the user experience of the machine which they are using, and all. Of course, you are allocating double the budget. Now, what cyber governance means? Cyber governance mainly means who owns the cyber risk, right? Who directs, controls, and drives the initiative which are required for driving the security requirement for the organization. uh, what are your acceptable risk levels? How are you making decisions based on your risk metrics? And how are you defining the KPIs and KRIs? Are there any measurable metrics which are available to you for defining the security requirement levels for your organization? Right. Now, definitely cyber governance is a business advantage today. Organizations which are protected, which are strong, are reliable, are resilient. uh, Bigger organizations will give you business based on your resilience level, ability to withstand attacks, ability to provide uptime even during worst of attacks. Right. Recently we saw Cloudflare outage happening, and a lot of organizations faced a great amount of downtime. Similarly, we had CrowdStrike causing outage last year in October, which brought a lot of airlines down, and it was a mayhem. So, why governance is important is because it understands the risks which can be brought out by use of various processes, use of various softwares, use of third parties, and that makes you understand that your business can be driven towards an uh, position of advantage vis-a-vis a disadvantage, right? Now it helps in faster decision making because you know your environment, you know what kind of tools you are dependent on, what kind of softwares you are using. So that gives you makes you do a faster decision making. Governance is also third party. You might be having mergers and acquisitions in your organizations. You need to understand merger and acquisitions risks. You need to understand divestiture risk. You need to understand acquisition risk. So governance drives your overall effort towards uh, uh, maintaining the resilience of the organization. It definitely reduces the security cost because you take risk-based decisions and not tool-based decisions. Now, the trust and compliance is a major factor when it comes to governance, because today the global compliance levels are increasing, privacy compliances are increasing, data management compliance levels are increasing, security compliance levels are increasing, resilience compliances are increasing. In India, we have two very strict compliance frameworks, which is RBI Cybersecurity Framework and SEBI CSCR. If you want to go public, you have to make your SEBI CSCRF as mandatory. You are someone who is in the fintech or financial industry, you have to follow SEBI CSCRF very, very seriously. RBI is a very, very strong regulator. If you do not have adequate cybersecurity controls, you might lose your license. There have been many credit card companies who have lost user onboarding licenses for 6 months, 1 year. Amex was one of them, HDFC also. So there have been many instances where compliance failures have happened because your governance was not strong. Now, in real world, what we are observing today is there are tools which are purchased by IT without understanding the risks, and that's what happens. You purchase tools without any governance, and that leads to a breach even after deploying a tool. So you need to understand the risk, then only deploy a tool. You have great governance in place, but you do not have a great allocated budget along with it so that the security team can buy its required tools. That leads to a great risk, because just governance will not help. You need the right tools to protect your environment. When you deploy both governance and tools, that leads to resilience. So if you understand your risk and you deploy appropriate measures, whether they are tools, whether they are policies, whether they are administrative controls, that builds your resilience. So what are the 5 pillars of cyber governance if you want to deploy governance in your organization? Firstly, the leadership definition. What are the roles and responsibilities which have been defined in your organization? who owns the security initiative in your organization, who manages security in your organization, do you have a risk management process around it? So a great way to drive risk management process is to adopt a framework, and there are some great frameworks available. ISO 27001 being one, NIST CSF being another, NIST SP 853 other being one, right? RBI CSF is a great framework. So you have to adopt a framework to drive the risk in your organization. And then once you understand your risk, what are the policies and processes which have been defined in your organization to drive your security initiatives? That's very important. You might understand your risk, but if you do not drive it through administrative controls, technology controls, physical controls, you will lack in your security effort. Now, one of the major part is capability to detect and respond to incidents, and that's where the SOC comes in. Do you have the capability to detect security incidents? Uh, Cyber is actually a war today, and to understand your enemy, you need to understand who is trying to attack you, and therefore detection becomes a major requirement, and then capability to respond becomes another requirement. And lastly, I can say is that compliance today is a major effort which goes in any organization to meet the compliance requirements. Compliance gaps bring in a lot of risk because the regulators are today very strong, and they are very sensitive when it comes to any kind of privacy related information, financial information, any anti-money laundering information getting leaked. Any data breach today causes a lot of embarrassment to the organization, right? So therefore we need to understand where our compliances lie. Now, when we look at the cyber governance architecture, when your leadership is very clearly defined, that leadership is enabled by various committees which you'll have to form. Now, one of the most common committees in mature organization is, you will see a information security governance committee or information security steering committee. Now, it's a good process to have your information security steering committee, which meets at least once a month or at least once a quarter if you are depending upon risk. If your organization is in the great risk space, in a great compliance space like banking, insurance, finance, you have to meet almost once a month to understand what are the risk levels, and then what are your detection and response capabilities, and it has to be monitored continuously. So once you form your governance committee, you understand your risks are reviewed, and you have the capability to detect and respond. That leads to some great compliance level, so that becomes a unified governance ecosystem. Now, when you talk about leadership and accountability, security has to be driven from the top. The board has to get involved. The CEO, the CXO suite has to get involved. You have very well defined responsibilities at organizational level. You have to own the assets. You have to own the risks. You have to uh, own the controls. You have to own the reviews who are going to review the controls, right? And understanding that cyber today is a business risk is a major effort required to be driven to the top management. Now, you're supposed to understand your risk, and therefore you should deploy a good risk management framework. One of the best frameworks today to manage information security is ISO 27001. Most of the organizations are trying to get ISO 27001 certified. Certification is okay, but the main thing is, do you understand the process which is required to drive a continuous ISO 27001 implementation? It's a governance framework. It's a risk management. It's a security management framework which is driven by risk. Therefore, it's great to have a risk register which will help you in mapping your risks. Third is where you have your policies and controls, right? You have to have a policy for information security. You have to have a policy for access controls. You have to have a policies for vendor management. How are you backing up your information? Do you understand your organization faces some kind of a ransomware risk, and do you have a policy to manage worst case scenario of a ransomware attack? Where are your backups stored? Do you have a year gap backup? So what happens is, security is not just a management perspective, it becomes a lot of technology perspective also. So policies and processes becomes a guardrail for security management. Now, lastly is your capability to detect your incidents and events, and capability to respond to various threats. So therefore, you need to have a SOC. You don't have to have some fancy glass walled SOC. You need to have your incident response plans. How are you going to detect the risks which you have evaluated, and from those risks, how do you understand what are your threats, what are your vulnerabilities, and how can you react to situations when something like some negative impact happens in your organizations. Now this should become part of your governance meetings to understand. There should be overall awareness as to what are your major attacks which are happening in your organization. And lastly, compliance today has become a very, very major requirement. Most of the organizations become busy with compliance, and therefore, you have to understand your compliance requirements. Look at India now; we have the DPDP requirements, which is though as simple. If you look at the DPDP requirements, it's simple, but implementing on digital businesses will become a challenging task if your organization has e-commerce or any kind of internet facing applications. That there it will become difficult for you to manage your DPTP requirements. Therefore, compliance provides you a rhythm to be in the business. The business keeps on growing. Now, what I will recommend for a smaller organization is draw a simple governance charter. Somebody should have the ownership for security. You should have a small risk register where you understand your risks, and depending upon the risks, you drive your controls and meet at least a month to understand your risk levels, your controls, and are there any major gaps. It's very important for the governance committee to keep reviewing the risks. What are the changes which has happened in the organization? What are the incidents which are happening? Are there any compliance gaps? And what are improvement levels? Because that will lead to what kind of resources you might require and budget allocations for the same. Now, I have done implementations in multiple organizations. In this particular organization, I'll give you a small case study where this organization had very mature tools, a very great IT team, but they were facing frequent cyber attacks, mainly because the product grew way beyond how security could catch up, right? A very simple drawback was not having an MFA on their public facing applications. So their clients were getting hacked almost on a daily basis. Then this organization works out of multiple geographical jurisdictions. So compliance levels were different in different regions. So understanding compliance was also becoming a major, major problem. Uh, there were frequent breaches happening in this organization because though controls were there, governance was missing, risk levels were missing. So once we went in, we defined the governance charter, we defined processes, we defined incident response plans, we defined compliance reporting processes, and that led to maturity levels in the organization. Now, when we deploy governance, what happens is, your risks become predictable. Understand what are the risks in your organization. It helps you in taking faster decisions against the risks which you measure. Compliance is ever evolving. You need to understand your compliance requirement also. Security without accountability, without ownership is no security. Therefore, establishing accountability, once you deploy your governance frameworks, accountability and ownership becomes a major priority area, and that actually improves your security. Uh, Tool duplication, too much of overlapping controls, increases the cost, and therefore when you drive governance, you drive risk, you understand what are the actual tools which are required, and that helps you in optimizing your cost. Now, over a period of time, the security industry has driven based on tools. Different vendors drive different type of tools, whereas now we are shifting to an era of risk-based security, and therefore unification of tools, unification of how different tools speak to each other. That's also become a priority. Now, once you have governance in place, your clients starts trusting you, vendors trusting you, and that is a major business outcome. And lastly, if you are in the compliance space, audit becomes a major requirement of all the times. Your audit readiness definitely improves. We also help organizations in maturing their governance requirements, right? We provide vCISO services, framework implementations, DPDP, SOC governance, and various cyber risk programs, and we have helped our clients in that particular manner. Now, if you want to, build a strong cyber governance, you can come with us and have a strategic consultation. You can visit our website. The link is on my bio, and you can go and give your interest. Now, cybersecurity is not about tools. As I always say, cybersecurity is not about tools. It's about governance, right? How you drive security requirements from the top, and how you deploy it in a very, very disciplined manner. So that was my daily nuggets for cybersecurity governance. If you have any questions, those who are live can ask me a question and I can answer the same. Right. Right. I know it's a weekday, and if you have any questions, you can drop in. Till then, I'll keep these podcasts on from time to time. See you next time. Thank you so much.